This video will walk you through some of the characteristics of sound and microphones. You can also check in chapter 1 in the book and also in chapter 3 on microphones if you don't want to watch this, but here it is all in one place in one video. When a sound is created, it radiates outward like ripples in a pool. However, it actually propagates in 3 physical dimensions, so it travels outward at the speed of sound as an ever-expanding sphere. The total acoustical energy remains constant as the sphere of sound gets larger, so the energy is spread over an increasingly wider area. It's possible to calculate how the energy is spread by using the formula for the area of a sphere, which is 4 pi r squared, where r is the radius, and in this case is the distance from the sound source. Therefore, the sound pressure at any point is proportional to the square of the distance from the source. That means that when the distance from the sound source doubles, the sound at that point will have 1/4 the original acoustical energy. And at 3 times the distance, it would have only 1/9 of the original acoustical energy. Humans can actually hear faster than they can see. Hearing sends information to our brain faster than any of the other senses. It's estimated that humans hear 20 to 100 times faster than they see. This is because the auditory circuitry in the brain is less widely distributed, so that audio signals have to travel a shorter distance to reach their destination. This may be because of evolution, in that audio information can be the most useful for survival. Since sound reaches the brain so quickly, it modifies all the other sensory information and can trigger emotions. For example, humans can hear danger and react to it faster than through the other senses. Hearing is also not limited to the space in front of us. We can hear 360 degrees in all directions. We can hear over much greater distances than we can see, touch, taste, or smell. And we can hear through solid objects that may block visual and other sensory information. This video explains what overtones are. The term timbre is the tonal quality of a particular sound. It's often mispronounced as timbre because the spelling of both words is similar. What makes the tonal quality of the sound is the group of sine waves that produce the fundamental and the overtone series. Triangle waves have the fundamental and then only the odd harmonics, the 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, etc. The strength of these harmonics is inversely proportional to the square of the harmonic number, so that there's 1/9 of the 3rd harmonic, 1/25 of the 5th harmonic, 1/49 of the 7th harmonic, and so on. Because the overtones are fairly weak, the triangle wave's timbre is only slightly more complex than the sine wave. The square wave has the fundamental, and like the triangle wave, has only the odd harmonics. But for the square wave, these harmonics are proportional to exactly the inverse of the harmonic number. That's 1/3 of the 3rd harmonic, 1/5 of the 5th harmonic, etc. So it sounds much more complex. The sawtooth wave has the fundamental, but has all of the harmonics, both odd and even. The strength is equal to the inverse of the harmonic number, meaning 1/2 of the 2nd, 1/3 of the 3rd, 1/4 of the 4th, etc. This makes the sawtooth's timbre very complex. Be aware that some sounds can also have harmonics that aren't exact multiples of the fundamental, called inharmonic overtones. And these are 4 basic types of waveforms: sine wave, square wave, triangle, and sawtooth. The sine wave has only the fundamental or first harmonic. There are no overtones. So it's the basic DNA of all waveforms. It's the purest form of a waveform, just a compression-expansion cycle. The triangle wave is only slightly more complex than the sine wave. It has only the odd harmonics, and they're very weak. They're in relationship to the inverse of the square of the harmonic number. For example, 1/9 of the 3rd harmonic, 1/25 of the 5th harmonic, 1/49 of the 7th harmonic, etc. Like the triangle wave, the square wave has only the odd harmonics, but here they're a lot stronger. They're in inverse proportion to the harmonic number. For example, 1/3 of the 3rd harmonic, 1/5 of the 5th harmonic, 1/7 of the 7th harmonic. So the wave sounds a little bit edgier. And you may be saying to yourself, nothing in nature would be that square. That's not natural to have a square wave like that. But what happens is when you do the Fourier series, when you add up all the harmonics, they actually create a square wave. And you can see this on oscilloscopes. In a few seconds, you'll see it in an Adobe Audition session. The sawtooth wave has both the odd and even harmonics, and here they're in inverse proportion to the harmonic number. For example, 1/2 of the 2nd harmonic, 1/3 of the 3rd harmonic, 1/4 of the 4th harmonic, etc. And it does, in fact, look like a sawtooth when you add up all those harmonics together. And as I promised, there's the Adobe Audition session. We're in the waveform editor, and so you can see the sine wave looks like a sine wave, the triangle wave looks like a triangle, the square wave looks like a square, and the sawtooth wave looks like a sawtooth. From the harmonics, you can see the fundamental there across the bottom. The sine wave, there are no harmonics. The triangle wave, they're odd harmonics, but they're very faint. The square wave has the same harmonics that the triangle wave has, but they're much stronger, and in the sawtooth, you have both the odd and even harmonics. So the amount and strength of the harmonics determines the sound quality. We call it the timbre. It's a French word. It's probably pronounced timbre, but we call it timbre, and most people call it timbre because it looks like timber. So this is Heinrich Hertz. He never lived to even be 40 years old, but in his short lifetime, he discovered radio waves and had a whole unit of measure named after him. Heinrich Rudolf Hertz, born 1857, was a German physicist whose research in electromagnetic theory of light demonstrated the existence of electromagnetic waves in 1888. In 1930, the unit of Hertz, being 1 cycle per second, was adopted by the International Electrotechnical Commission, the IEC. The human ear ideally hears about 10 octaves from 20 Hz up to 20 kHz. Frequencies below this range are infrasonic. Frequencies above this range are ultrasonic. Radio frequencies, abbreviated RF, can be as low as 3 kHz, which is in the range of human hearing, all the way up to 300 billion hertz. That's 300 gigahertz. In 1964, the unit was adopted by the General Conference of Weights and Measures. Thereafter, Hertz, abbreviated capital H, lowercase z, is used in every instance in place of cycles per second. So in 1888, Hertz discovers radio waves. In 1930, Hertz is established as a unit of measure by the International Electrotechnical Commission, and in 1964, Hertz is adopted by the General Conference of Weights and Measures as a unit of measure to replace cycles per second. So what is the range of human hearing? Well, check out the video.
Yo, what if you knew you were going to die tomorrow? What would your last meal be? One choice.
One choice?
Probably cereal for you, huh?
But what the hell's wrong with cereal?
It's cliche. You gotta be original. You know, if you were an original, broad-thinking man, you'd probably come up with some special cereal, like Eerios, you know, just like your ear. You know, pour milk on them suckers, they just lay there and you don't hear them suckers.
For the record, my hearing is 20/20.
That's meant to be a joke, but actually 20/20 hearing is the right answer. And here's another video that talks about that. Here's an easy mnemonic to remember what frequencies a human can hear. As perfect vision is generally considered to be 20/20, perfect hearing is also 20/20. That is, ideally a person can hear all frequencies from 20 Hz up to 20 kHz, approximately 10 octaves. Generally, after people have operated a few power tools and been to a few rock concerts, the range becomes 35 Hz up to 16 kHz. By age 60, most people's hearing is 35 Hz up to 10 kHz, 1 full octave lower on the high end and nearly 1 octave less on the low end. Also, within this range, people don't hear all frequencies with the same loudness. Generally, people hear mid-frequencies louder than those at the extreme high or low end. So it's a great idea to protect your ears from extreme loud noises so that you can enjoy a full range of sound throughout your life. So that makes it easy to remember. Just as 20/20 vision is ideal, 20/20 hearing is ideal as well. But as the video points out, your hearing doesn't remain ideal. It's ideal when you're very young, but then after you've operated lawnmowers and chainsaws and whatever and been to rock concerts, your hearing starts to diminish. And with age, your hearing diminishes as well. This is from The Simpsons.
Okay, gentlemen, I want you to raise your hand when you hear the tone.
You can't tell me what to do.
Nothing yet!
So we call the range from 0 to 20 Hz, which is below human hearing, that's infrasonic, and above 20 kHz is ultrasonic. They actually discovered that some infrasonic sound can be very deadly, and this is an episode about that. In biblical times, the walls of Jericho were reported to have been leveled by sound. In more recent times, loud and obnoxious sounds played at high volume have been used to disorient and annoy an enemy. In 1957, by accident, Dr. Vladimir Govro and his research team discovered that sound could also become a very deadly weapon. Govro's team was working on robotics research when they all became very ill. After an investigation, it was discovered that there was an improperly installed ventilator motor in their building. that when coupled with a long air shaft that acted like an organ pipe, had created an inaudible 7 Hz tone. Once the team recovered, they decided to research and see if they could repeat what had happened and possibly create a weapon. They called their weapon the infrasonic organ. They demonstrated it, and it almost killed them a second time. In an attempt to make the weapon more compact and controllable, Dr. Govreau created his infrasonic whistle, which could be robotically guided onto a battlefield and kill everyone on the ground, all without making a sound, at least none that anyone could hear. So the terms frequency and pitch are often used synonymously, but they're really two different terms. Frequency is physical and pitch is physiological. Another term that defines pitch or frequency is the octave. It's the doubling of pitch. It's technically the doubling of frequency, but between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz, the range of human hearing, we can hear about 10 octaves. Every time the frequency doubles, the pitch becomes 1 octave higher. So when the frequency changes from 20 hertz to 40 hertz, a difference of only 20 hertz, the pitch becomes 1 octave higher. When the frequency goes from 10 kilohertz to 20 kilohertz, a difference of 10 kilohertz, the new pitch is still only 1 octave higher. We tend to think of octaves within the range of human hearing, but if the frequency goes from 1 megahertz to 2 megahertz, that's also an octave. In a complete harmonic overtone series with both odd and even harmonics, the second harmonic is twice the fundamental, and that's the octave. The third harmonic, 3 times the fundamental, would be the musical fifth. The fourth harmonic, 4 times the fundamental, would be the next octave. The fifth harmonic is 5 times the fundamental, making it the musical third. The sixth harmonic, 6 times the fundamental and twice the third harmonic, is the octave of the musical fifth. The eighth harmonic is 3 octaves higher than the fundamental. So a major chord would have the frequency relationship of either 4 to 5 to 6, or 3 to 4 to 5, or 5 to 6 to 8, depending on the inversion. It may be convenient for us to break human hearing into 3 ranges: bass, mid-range, and treble. Octaves 1 through 4, from 20 Hz up to 320 Hz, are the bass. We call that the power range because in the old days when we were watching on VU meters, frequencies in that range moved the meters the most, so they were actually generating the most power. The next 4 octaves, octaves 5, 6, 7, and 8, we call that the mid-range or the presence range. And by the way, if you enjoy AM radio, this is about the range you hear on AM radio. There's not too much below 320. It may go down a little lower than that, but it actually tops out at 5 kilohertz. Also, if you had to hear only one range, this would be the range you'd want to hear because you can actually hear humans and understand speech in this range. Music might not sound that wonderful, but speech is great. And that's why AM radio has been relegated to talk radio now. It used to be music at one time, but now nobody can stand to listen to music on AM radio. And the top 2 octaves, octaves 9 and 10, from 5120 up to 20 kilohertz, we call that the brilliance range. And that adds the sparkle and the clarity in the music and the dialogue or whatever we're listening to. In naturally occurring sound waves, there's one waveform that's the basic DNA of all of them. It's the sine wave, which is the most simple compression-expansion cycle and how sound moves through air and other media. Other more complicated waveforms are made up of the initial sine wave, known as both the fundamental and the first harmonic, and additionally generated sine waves called overtones. Since the fundamental is called the first harmonic, the first overtone is the second harmonic. The second overtone is the third harmonic, and so on. There's an easy way to calculate the frequency of any overtone in a harmonic overtone series. Suppose that the fundamental, the first harmonic, is 1 kilohertz. To find the frequency of any other harmonic, simply multiply the fundamental frequency by the harmonic number. That would make the second harmonic 2 kilohertz, the third harmonic 3 kilohertz, the 10th harmonic 10 kilohertz, and so on. The strength and number of these overtones create an audio texture called the timbre, and makes it possible for humans and other animals to recognize and identify sounds. So this is a typical overtone series. You have the fundamental or the root, then the second harmonic, which is the octave, the third harmonic, which is actually the musical fifth, the fourth harmonic, which is twice the second harmonic, which is the octave again, the fifth harmonic, which is the musical third, the sixth harmonic, which is actually twice the third harmonic, which is the musical fifth, the seventh harmonic, which is ironically the musical seventh, and then the eighth harmonic, which is twice the fourth harmonic and 4 times the second harmonic, which is the octave again. And here's what they sound like. By the way, if you're a brass player, the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth harmonics are the ones that usually used to warm up. It's bop, 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 bop. And in fact, if you play bugle, all bugle calls are made up of those four notes. So the fundamental is the first harmonic, the first overtone is the second harmonic, and the second overtone is the third harmonic, etc. So the overtone is always one less than the harmonic number. Another very common audio term is the decibel, or dB. After Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone and telephone lines began to be strung up all over, the bell, spelled B-E-L, was the loss of signal strength in 1 mile of telephone line. A decibel is then 1/10 of that. A microphone output is generally in the range of -65 to -85 dB. Line level, the signal level that audio devices operate, is typically +4 dB for professional gear, like recording consoles, digital audio workstations, tape recorders, and outboard signal processors. For consumer gear like TVs, CD and DVD players, the line level is -10, 14 dB lower. Generally, any analog input or output that uses an RCA or phono connector is at the -10 dB level. Although a 14 dB difference between professional and consumer line level may not seem like that much, remember that an increase of only 6 dB doubles the volume. So the bell was an homage to Alexander Graham Bell, and it represents the amount of signal loss in 1 mile of telephone line. 18th century philosopher George Berkeley once asked, "If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around, does it make a sound?" Although the question is more of a starter for philosophical discussion, it does help illustrate the difference between loudness and volume. The answer to Berkeley's question and the difference between loudness and volume all depend on how you define sound. For instance, if you define sound in physical terms, that is, physical changes in air pressure that can be measured by audio meters, then the tree falling does make a sound. However, if you define sound in physiological terms, sound pressure reaching a human eardrum so that the person actually hears sound, then, if no one's around, there is no sound. Volume is a physical measurement, whereas loudness is physiological. That is, any frequency that creates an equal sound pressure would have an equal volume. However, frequencies outside the range of human hearing, no matter what the volume, would have zero loudness. Here's a Pearls Before Swine parody of the George Berkeley "If a Tree Falls in the Forest" line. Another common audio term is SPL, or sound pressure level, and that's measured in dB. You see, 0 dB and 0 SPL is the threshold of hearing, and that's generally when you're in an anechoic chamber. Normally, theaters are set to about 85 dB, but a rock concert can be as high as approaching 130 dB or more. And now you're starting to get into the threshold of discomfort and pain. And, you can lose your hearing in high noise situations like this. Operating chainsaws and lawnmowers, you can easily be in this 120 to 130, 140 dB range. And that's why protecting your ears is so important. You don't get another set of ears. I bought some ear protection like that from Harbor Freight, I think for $4. I bought some like that from Outdoor World for about $20. You can get the earplugs that you stick in your ears for a couple of bucks from CVS or Walgreens. But you should use those when you're operating loud equipment. When you go to a rock concert, you'll still hear the concert, but your ears won't ring forever. You don't want that to happen.
For God's sake, will you stop complaining?
Well, I'm sorry, but the music in that club was so loud, my ears are still ringing. You know what that sound is? That is the sound of the little hairs in my middle ear dying. I am talking permanent hearing loss, Charlie. Those little hairs don't grow back. Oh, wait, let's see something.
Listen to you. You're like an old man.
I can't listen to me. All I hear is...
This is another graph that was from the textbook we used to use, and these are called equal loudness curves. And what they show there is that it's easier to hear some frequencies at lower energy than others. For example, if you want to hear bass with the same amount of loudness as, say, mid-range, you have to have a whole lot more energy. And that's why some sound systems build in the loudness button where it jacks up the low end so you can, even at lower volumes, hear the bass. The speed of sound can be an issue for audio as well. And it depends on the temperature, the barometric pressure, and the medium that it's passing through. The speed of sound, also known as the sound barrier, for years was thought to be the theoretical limit for flight speed. Chuck Yeager disproved that theory by flying faster than the speed of sound in 1947. The actual speed of sound varies based on the density of the medium that it's moving through. In air, the speed of sound is most affected by temperature and barometric pressure. At 70 degrees Fahrenheit, at sea level, sound travels at 1,130 feet per second through the air. It travels 60% faster than that through water and 600% faster, 18,000 feet per second, through steel. As the temperature drops to 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius, the speed of sound through air drops to 1,086 feet per second. To set delay times for speakers for short distances inside a venue, a useful approximation is that it takes sound 1.1 milliseconds to travel 1 foot. So if one speaker set is 60 feet closer to the audience than another, the closer speakers could be delayed 66 milliseconds, so that sound from both speaker sets reach the audience at the same time. Wavelength is another term that applies to audio, and here's the definition. Every frequency, both audible and inaudible, has a distinct wavelength. The wavelength is the distance that it takes for that frequency to travel one complete cycle. The higher the frequency, the shorter the wavelength, since the wavelength of an audio signal is equal to the speed of sound divided by the frequency. High-frequency audio sounds have a shorter wavelength that can be absorbed more easily in carpet, wall covering, and ceiling tile. Lower frequencies need a deeper trap to attenuate these longer wavelengths. Also, because lower frequencies have longer wavelengths, rooms can often be too small to hear some low-frequency sounds. They need to be at least 20 feet in one dimension to be able to develop 60 hertz. This is why it seems so loud when your car is pulled up next to a car that has a subwoofer. The low frequency doesn't really reach its maximum sound pressure level until it hits your car 20 to 30 feet away. Here's the story about Christian Doppler and the Doppler effect. Christian Doppler was an Austrian physicist, astronomer, and mathematician born in 1803. At age 39, he published a study on colored light emanating from binary stars. Doppler suggested that the color of light depended on the relative speed of the star to the observer. This theory became known as the Doppler effect, and it explains why an approaching car horn will have a higher pitch as it's approaching and a lower pitch as it drives away. When the car is moving toward the listener, the sound waves are arriving closer together, which increases the frequency, raising the pitch. As the car moves away, the sound waves arrive farther apart, which decreases the frequency, lowering the pitch. Consider an organ using a speaker cabinet with a rotating speaker. As the speaker rotates toward the listener, the pitch is higher. As it rotates away, the pitch is lower. This vibrato is being produced by the Doppler effect. Phase relationships exist acoustically, and they also exist electronically, and they can be used to eliminate possible hum or electromagnetic fields picked up in mic cables. Here's the story about that. Professional gear and cables are generally balanced, meaning that the signal is carried on 3 wires within the cable: a high, a low, and a ground. The high and the low carry the identical signal, but 180 degrees out of phase. The idea of a balanced line works like this. Since some audio signals can be fairly weak, like the low-level signals from a microphone, the cable could be susceptible to picking up electromagnetic fields. If and when this happens, the signal strength of the electromagnetic field, be it hum or RF, will be equal on both the high and the low. When the cable terminates at the console, a transformer reverses the phase of the low side, including any hum or RF that it picked up after the microphone. The positive hum or RF on the high side is added to the equal but negative hum or RF on the low side. And like matter and antimatter, they completely cancel out. The actual signal from the microphone, which was out of phase on the cable to begin with, is added together in phase and becomes twice as loud, approximately 6 dB. Contrast this to an unbalanced line that only has a high plus ground. An analogy could be made that the balanced line is like a dual-coil humbucker guitar pickup versus an unbalanced single-coil pickup, with the same results. Not all, but most microphones today that aren't USB microphones generally have an XLR connector on the back. That didn't used to be the case with microphones, but that's become kind of standard. Some exceptions to this would be, for example, tube condenser microphones and microphones that have the connections that are meant to plug into cell phones or other devices. One way to help control phase relationships in a room is by using a diffuser. When sound is reflected between 2 parallel surfaces, a standing wave pattern is produced. The resonant frequency of the standing wave is equal to the speed of sound divided by the distance between the parallel surfaces. Standing wave patterns producing resonant frequencies can be an issue in recording studios. In the recording rooms with the musicians, they can produce strange-sounding resonances. In the control rooms, they can cause the mix engineer to try to correct for a problem that may not exist. That is, the mix engineer might add EQ to help cut frequencies that are enhanced or boost frequencies that are eliminated by the standing waves in the control room. One way to eliminate the standing wave pattern is to eliminate the parallel surfaces. However, if that isn't possible, another solution is to use a diffuser. One type of diffuser has multiple compartments that eliminate the parallel condition by varying the depth of each compartment. Since the deeper ones cause the sound to be reflected later than in the shallower ones, these diffusers create time delays within the reflection and eliminate the standing wave. Another type of diffuser uses polycylindrical or other angled shapes to bounce the sound in different directions to eliminate the parallel reflections. Both types of diffusers can work well to eliminate the standing wave patterns created by parallel surfaces. So microphones are transducers, and a transducer is something that changes energy into a different form. Microphones can be classified by the method they use to convert acoustical energy into electrical energy. Moving coil mics, commonly called dynamic mics, work like speakers, only in reverse. The sound pressure moves the diaphragm, which pushes a coil through a magnetic field and generates electricity. Ribbon mics work more like a guitar string on an electric guitar, in that the vibration of the ribbon itself over the magnet generates the electricity. Capacitor mics, usually called condensers, have two diaphragms, just as capacitors do. The charge on the capacitor is determined by the distance between the diaphragms. As sound pressure deforms the flexible diaphragm, the capacitance changes and produces electricity. Since the diaphragms need electricity to act as a capacitor, these mics all require power to operate. So microphones are usually classified by the type of capsule they have. Condenser mics do require power because there's some electronics involved, and they can get that power three ways. Unlike dynamic or ribbon mics, capacitor or condenser microphones require power to operate. Typically, these mics need 48 volts, although some condenser mics will draw less power. There are usually three ways to supply power to the microphone. Some condenser microphones have internal batteries that provide the power. Most tube condenser mics have a dedicated power supply that goes in between the mic and the console. However, the most common way to supply power to these mics is called phantom power. This is where the console itself sends power to the mic. It's called phantom because instead of a visible external power supply, the phantom power is invisible. If you're using a dynamic mic and phantom power is turned on, no worries. A dynamic mic won't draw any power. But for a ribbon mic, it's a different story. Ribbon mics can often be damaged by supplying phantom power. So for that mic's input, it's best to make sure that the phantom power is turned off. So condenser mics require power, usually 48 volts. They have the best transient response, and we'll talk about what that is in a minute. They have the highest output, which is good because that means you have to turn up the mic preamp less and you get better signal and less noise. And they're usually the most expensive because they are the most complex microphones. Dynamic microphones don't require power. They're more rugged. They handle overloads best because they're lower inertia. You can scream and do all kinds of things to these mics without it overloading. And also they handle overloads best because they don't have much output. And they usually are the least expensive. Ribbon mics don't require power. In fact, they can be damaged by power. They're always bidirectional, and we'll talk about that when we talk about polar response pattern here in a minute. And they look kind of cool because they're kind of retro looking. So the polar response pattern of a microphone is the way that it picks up sound from all directions. And here's the story about that. Just as cameras have close-up, medium, and wide-angle lenses, microphones also vary in the way they capture sound. The polar response pattern measures how a microphone picks up sound in all directions. A mic that picks up uniformly in all directions has an omnidirectional pattern. A mic that picks up front and back, but not the sides, has a bidirectional or figure-8 pattern. A microphone that picks up almost exclusively from the front has a unidirectional or cardioid pattern. The term cardioid comes from the word meaning heart, as in cardiologist, since this pattern is heart-shaped. The majority of mics used in studios are cardioid, since engineers prefer to aim the mics at what they want to record. Within the cardioid family, there are the subcategories of supercardioid, hypercardioid, and ultracardioid. Picking a mic with a proper polar response pattern can help you get the results you want. So an omnidirectional microphone would pick up the sound equally from all directions, and most lavalier microphones, by the way, are omnidirectional. A bidirectional or figure-8 mic picks up the sound from the front and back, but not the sides. And a unidirectional or cardioid microphone picks up primarily from the front. I say only at the front, but primarily at the front. There's some pickup from the back as well. And for cardioid microphones, there are a number of different patterns depending on the length of the interference tube and other things. But boom microphones are typically either the hypercardioid or ultracardioid variety. The way that microphones pick up sound from all directions is called the polar response pattern. To achieve a unidirectional or cardioid pattern so that they can be aimed at the various instruments, mics have what's known as phasing ports. They work like this. Since sound radiates in all directions, whether the sound is coming from the back, front, or sides, it will have an effect on the mic's capsule. The capsule is the transducer that converts the acoustical energy into electricity. If the mic only has a grill or ports in the front side, sound coming from all directions will enter there and have approximately the same effect. However, if there's another pathway for the sound to strike the capsule, say from the back, then sound coming from that direction will strike the back at the same time it strikes the front of the capsule. Since the pressure would be equal but opposite, the net result is that the sound coming from the back of the mic cancels. Therefore, cardioid mics all have phasing ports, holes along the barrel of the mic for sound to enter. Sound coming from the front can also enter through the phasing ports and strike the back, but since it has to travel a small distance past the capsule to enter the port, and then travel another distance to strike the back of the capsule, the sound is delayed. This means that it arrives too late to cancel with the sound from the front. Typically, dialogue for movies is recorded with a combination of wireless lav mics and boom mics. The advantage of a wireless lav is that it has great vocal presence because it's only inches away from the actor's mouth. The advantage of a boom or shotgun mic is that the microphone automatically records dialogue with the proper camera perspective. With a boom mic, dialogue sounds farther away on wide shots and more present on close-ups, since the mic is farther away on the wide shots and closer on the close-ups. Sometimes, however, when actors aren't moving around very much in a scene, the sound recorder might choose to use a plant mic. This is a stationary mic that can be hidden from the camera in the scenery or behind a piece of furniture. The mic can be really close to the actors and still not be seen. In fact, some plant mics actually look like plants. There are also stereo and surround sound microphones. In fact, the Tascam DR40s that the department has have stereo microphones built in. And there are mid-side microphones that are especially good at recording mono-compatible stereo. In 1934, British electronics engineer Alan Blumlein, who was a pioneer of stereo recording, proposed a microphone technique called mid-side, using two coincident microphones. Coincident in this case means that the mics are practically touching each other. Generally, the mid-mic is a cardioid pattern, but not always, and the side mic is always a bidirectional figure-8 pattern that is oriented at 90 degrees to the mid-mic. The two mics are recorded on separate tracks. For monitoring or playback, the mid-mic is panned to the center and the side mic is routed to two faders. One is panned left and one is panned right. The phase of the right side mic is reversed. The two side mics should have identical gain. Lowering the level of the side mics will make the signal more mono. Raising the level of the side mics will make the stereo signal wider. Besides not having to have a matched pair of mics to record stereo, the big advantage of using a mid-side arrangement is that the stereo signal is 100% mono-compatible, since it uses differences in volume instead of time delays to create the left and right channels. There are high-def microphones. These are microphones that pick up above the range of human hearing. Very few of them actually go up to 50 kilohertz, but a lot of them will go up to 40 kilohertz. Most microphones are designed to capture sound in the 20 Hz to 20 kHz range, the nominal range of human hearing. However, there are mics that have a bandwidth that extends upward to 50 kHz, more than an octave higher than even people with perfect hearing can detect. The reason for doing this is that the harmonics of the highest frequency fundamentals, which would be lost with a conventional microphone, can now be recorded. These overtones add timbral information and improve the definition and sound quality. This can be especially useful when the recorded material is to be pitch-shifted down. The additional high-frequency information can make the pitch-shifted audio sound less processed, since the harmonics that would have been absent with a conventional microphone are now present. In the 2005 Peter Jackson version of King Kong, Andy Serkis, the actor playing the voice of King Kong, was recorded with a high-def mic so that his gorilla characterizations could be pitched down more than an octave without losing too many of the overtones. Conventional 20 Hz to 20 kHz mics are still used much more often, but for many applications, high-def mics can add definition and dramatically improve the sound quality. There are boundary layer microphones, contact and noise-canceling microphones, and other types including adaptive array, parabolic, recording mics, and headset mics. So there are 8 characteristics that all microphones have. In addition to polar response pattern and capsule type, every make of microphone has 8 characteristics that differentiate it from other mics. Transient response is how well the microphone is able to capture rapid changes in the sound. In general, condensers and ribbon mics have better transient response than dynamic mics. Overload limit is how easily the microphone can be overdriven. Here, most dynamic mics are harder to overload than condensers and ribbons. Max SPL is how much energy can reach the mic capsule before it produces 3% total harmonic distortion. Microphone output sensitivity, typically minus 85 dB for dynamic mics up to minus 65 dB for condensers, is how much signal the mic outputs. Self-noise is the amount of noise measured in an anechoic chamber that the microphone produces with no signal present. Signal-to-noise ratio is the usable dynamic range of the mic, basically the difference between the max SPL and the self-noise. Proximity effect is how the low-frequency response increases, typically with a cardioid pattern, when the microphone is close to the sound source. Finally, and most important, is the frequency response. Most manufacturers attempt to make this as flat as possible. This means few peaks and dips between 20 Hz to 20 kHz, or an octave or more higher for some high-def mics, so that the microphone faithfully reproduces the actual sound. And finally, there's a Mic Modeler app, which is marketed by Antares. They make auto-tune as well. But the idea of this was that you enter the type of microphone you have and the type of microphone you want it to sound like, and it kind of models the microphone, a cheaper mic, to sound like a more expensive microphone. The only thing this affects is actually that frequency response curve. It doesn't affect anything else but that. So it seemed like a good idea. You can buy this app and then you can just buy cheap mics and make them sound like all these expensive mics, but it doesn't really work. Well, that's it for this video. I'm sorry that it was so long, but there's a lot of information I wanted to cover. So go ahead and look at the information in the rest of the module, including the first project.